So we're recording now, which means, Mel, whenever you're ready, if you'd like to share your screen.
Okay. Uh-oh. How did I do that again? Down the bottom? Oh, sorry. How did I do that again? Share. Share up, down the bottom. Share. Oh, there we are.
Found it? Good.
Found it. Okay. Can you see that?
Yes.
That PowerPoint? Yep. Cool. All right. All right. It's over there. Okay. Very good. So thank you for joining, inviting me to come along and present on the work that we've been doing with the Fonz, our Serrated Tussock detection dog, of which some of you will already be familiar from back when I was over in Victoria at the Zoom meeting with you all. Well, with most people, I think. So there's Fonzie in his very special jacket that was made when he got to meet the Tasmanian governor, which was quite exciting, when she came up on the East Coast on her tours and actually visited a property, an old convict probation property at Rocky Hills that has Serrated Tussock, funnily enough, and has been one of our training properties since the early days. And actually one of the landholder who owns that property was instrumental in getting us delivering little weed packages, which looked very suspicious as they were dropped off at my front door for the first couple of years of Fonzie's life, or the first probably 18 months. Well, actually not even that long, to be honest, because he was pretty well out in the field by about 8 months. So Fonz, I'll say at the beginning, I'm not sure how many of you guys are at all, is most people kind of fairly familiar with Serrated Tussock? Anyone not familiar?
I'd like to hear more about it, Mel.
Yeah, okay, cool. So look, I'm a pretty out of touch in terms of what it's like on the Big Island, other than certainly I understand in Victoria and parts of Western Victoria it is pretty bad, and in New South Wales. In Tasmania, introduced back in the 50s accidentally, probably came in more than likely on hay or stock or machinery, any of those possible things. Pretty terrible perennial grass. I guess one of the key things about it is that it has quite a low nutritional value. So your stock could eat it, but they don't necessarily get very good nutritional value from it. So you will definitely lose massive condition from your well, and I don't know what work's been done on native wildlife, so it'd be interesting to actually find out a bit more about that. But certainly it is a big risk for agricultural landscapes, and certainly native grasslands it can well and truly take over. Urban areas, there's parts, I don't know if people are familiar with Tasmania, but in the Clarence municipality, it is pretty almost sort of getting to the point of out of control in some places, in people's backyards, in foreshore reserves. There's sort of quite a lot of peri-urban properties there. Oh, Alex is back. So just doing a bit of a background on Tussock. Alex?
I'll just fit in, no worries. I'm sorry about it. We had a bit of a gremlin in the computer again, but we'll be right now, hopefully.
No worries. Yeah, so very, very prolific seed producer, basically produces these sort of tumbleweeds of seed that just go blowing all across the countryside. Loves dry landscape. So the east coast of Tasmania and also southern Tasmania as well are very, very susceptible to it, particularly at the moment, as are lots of parts of the mainland. Yeah, loves drought. But I'll get to that a little bit later on. Certainly, we found where we are, as we've got more of a handle on it, we sort of only really discovered it here on the East Coast sort of probably a bit over 10 years ago now. It's been lurking, but nobody really was familiar with it. So it was actually on a farm where I used to live, and I certainly wasn't familiar with it. So I was probably walking over it for quite some years until it was identified by a weed spray contractor who had been doing quite a lot of work with it in southern Tasmania. anyway, perfectly suited to southern Tasmania. So this is our municipality. You'll see this map. That map's probably a bit out of date already now, but you can see we've got hotspots, and we are increasingly finding outliers. Those hotspots are areas where there's some quite substantial populations, particularly in the northern part here, which is north of Swansea, for anyone who's familiar with the east coast of Tasmania. And Little Swamport is another really key hotspot. And for the landholders in our municipality, we've had probably about 7 or 8 years of trying to get money and resources from wherever we can to work with, educate, help landholders who have it to manage it, because there is potential it could fairly well cover our whole municipality, and it's a grazing landscape, dry wool, increasingly viticulture as well, but predominantly sheep grazing country, so perfectly suited for the transport of this particular weed. In a nutshell, it's bloody hard to identify it. Even when you got your eye in, it can look very, very much like a native poa, or other native grasses, especially at various stages of its life cycle. There's certain tricks to kind of helping identify it, but like I say, even if you're really good at, one of my colleagues, Amanda, who's worked very closely with me in training Fonzie, she spends all day, every day out there in the field doing on-ground weed control. She can generally spot tussock at, 100 Ks, but even Amanda, sometimes you just start going mad, as it is with lots of these weeds. It really is hard to pick. So we thought perhaps a nose might help, because not always your eyes are that useful. So the idea for Fonz, as far as my partner was concerned, was ridiculous and was just another excuse to get a puppy. So I had to do a bit of work on that. And certainly there are a fair few people who were not quite so convinced about the whole being able to train a dog to find, well, weeds in general, but certainly serrated tussock. The inspiration, of course, to get to train a dog to find tussock was Sally. Well, actually, the precursor, now I can't remember I've forgotten the name of the first Hawkweed dogs. It's not on Hawkweed anymore. Can anyone?
Yeah, Missy.
Yeah, that's right. So the Tasmanian Weed Society back in the day, which is still currently in hold, I think, organised, I think it was the 4th Australasian Weed Conference, which was held at the Grand Chancellor in Hobart probably 4 or 5 years ago, maybe a bit longer. And Missy and Steve, with it wasn't Hilary Cherry, but with a Parks New South Wales person, did a sort of, the dying afternoon on the last day of the conference, when people are disappearing like flies. They actually managed to draw in quite a big crowd to the Grand Chancellor in Hobart, and did a demo of the Hawkweed, of Missy finding Hawkweed within the auditorium. And I don't know if any of you guys have been to weed conferences, but they're generally quite boring. To be perfectly honest, certainly back in the day, there's a lot more community weed stuff nowadays, but back in the day, they're often really quite dry, technical, how does this chemical uptake in the plants, a bit hard going, but certainly this was the highlight for me. And I was like, well, that's about the coolest thing I've ever seen. And having done weed management for about 20 years, sometimes it is pretty hard to excite people about weed management, particularly something like serrated tussock, which is just not very glamorous, and can really be quite disheartening. Not only if you don't have much of it, disheartening because you don't even know which one it is, but if you got a lot of it, because particularly as our landholders are discovering now, it can be very, very challenging to control once it's out of control. So, of course, Sally and Connor, that was up at Falls Creek when we were helping out with Emma's research. So I basically kind of harassed Steve Austin for a while, went to a couple of things he was doing in Tassie. He was at the Brim Creek show doing a presentation one time. I think that might have been when I first rocked up to meet him. And then I went to a Noseworks workshop that he did down in Hobart, and basically said, oh, do you reckon you could train a dog to find this grass? And he kind of looked at me and went, who are you? And yes, I don't see why not. It took a bit of convincing to get Steve on side, because he is very busy doing lots of other stuff. Also because I was pretty locked on to getting a German Shepherd, and those of you who know Steve knows he's 100% Mr. Springer Spaniel man when it comes to his conservation dogs, because obviously he knows them and they work. And it wasn't that he didn't think a Tussock dog, a German Shepherd, and Fonz is a working line German Shepherd, could do it. I guess he was just keen to go with what he knows. But I had other reasons why I wanted a Shepherd, and one being one of my other dogs probably would have killed a Spring Spaniel, I suspect. So, anyway, Steve did say if I ever got a picture of him with Fonzie with that jacket on, that he would kill me. So, of course, that was a challenge. So we got a picture of him with Fonzie with that jacket on quite cunningly. This was back when we were doing our training. Steve spent not a huge amount of time with us, basically. Met Fonzie a couple of times when he was a puppy, to kind of put him through his paces to see whether he would be suitable. I should probably jump back a step. Fonzie's breeder breeds working line German Shepherds, and quite a number of her dogs. They go to the Tasmanian Police. Oh, sorry, not the Tasmanian Police, because we don't have multi-purpose dogs. That's a whole other story. Vic Police, New South Wales Police. I think Western Australia might have one or two. His dad, Fonz's dad, is a Fargo, is being trained as a siege dog now for Victorian Police. So the head trainer for Vic Pol actually put his litter of puppies through their paces for what they use them for, and Yolanda, his breeder, asked if she could sort of pick a dog, I guess, that would have the aptitude for conservation detection work, and explained what it was that we wanted to do with him. And he was the pup that came out at the end. So yeah, Steve came down a few times, spent time with myself and Fonz, and particularly Amanda, my colleague from work here. And then, gosh, how old was he? He would have probably been, basically instructed me what I needed to do step by step to get him onto Tussock. And then come over and spent a week with myself and Nicole Gill as one of the other handlers. And you can see the girl in the background there, that's Nona. She also works with me at council. She's one of our weed spray, weed control staff. So, yep, I've already kind of gone through that. Basically, Fonz was on Tussock in a box from 8 weeks old. That was where he started. From what I gather, different people go about training dogs on scents in all sorts of different ways, but essentially we were using positive reinforcement and negative punishment. That was it. You got Tussock, you got the reward. You didn't put your nose on the box that didn't have the Tussock in, you didn't get anything. Pretty smart dog. He worked it out pretty quickly. Essentially, I should have put a video on this. We basically got to the point with these boxes. I have 10 of these boxes, and well, he was pretty well onto it before he was 6 months old, really, where he would very, very easily pick the Tussock, basically, no matter how you tried to trick him. And then we started testing him out in the field, and essentially, and as well, he did just your sort of basic puppy school, basic obedience stuff, not massive amount of obedience, but certainly enough to make him a sociable and friendly dog at the same time. So, yeah, so he's out in the field by, probably between 6 to 8 months. We have tried just every opportunity we get, basically, as part of our work through council. He certainly is. We don't actually have, we're a really small council, so we don't actually have a budget. So when Fonz comes to work, there's no money in it for me. It's a good thing for me because it gets my dog out there at work. That's excellent, and working. But it's a way for us to get out and connect with people in our community. Particularly, we find, well, we've actually found really quite positive response from agriculture, or from farmers, which was sort of always a bit of a concern in the early days because, you know, the old German Shepherd on sheep farm thing. Luckily, most people have moved on from that. And he's certainly been, I guess, proofed on other animals when job's on for Fonz. He's not interested in anything else. But we have quite a number of rural res properties that have tussock, and just the odd plant in amongst all your native grasses. This property here is a really good example. It's directly across from across the water. It's at Little Swamport. It's at a place called Pontypool. On the other side of the water, there is a massive infestations of tussock on the hillside. So all these sort of rural res properties on the other side of the water body periodically just have little bits of tussock pulling up. And a lot of people, like this family here, they are only up on the weekends. And they loved it when we turned up with the Fonz, and it really helped them get their eye in to find the plant. Their daughter's not in this picture, but she had a great time trying to see who can find the tussock before her or Fonz first. And yeah, I guess we've tried to get him out in all sorts of different environments as much as we can. But as of course I'm sure all of you people know, the dog's not the answer to the problem. It's one of the tools in your toolbox. And we're not using drones. So I actually just put that in there because of a really good presentation at the last week conference, where the Hawkweed project talked about how they're in New South Wales, how they're using drones as well as part of their searching strategy. And maybe one day down the track we might too, but we're moving towards using the dog as we would like to, which I'll get to in a minute. But certainly in the first couple of years of having Fonz out in the field, he's been a really great way to raise the profile of what is a fairly boring weed and get people like these guys and lots of other people realising, no, this is important. We've all got to take it seriously. We've all got a part to play in doing it. Where to next? That's I don't know if people are familiar with the beautiful dogs down at Salamanca down there. Always a good photo shoot if you have a doggy in Hobart. Excuse me. So we've actually just received a grant for a project between Glamorgan Spring Bay Council and Tasman Council, so down the Tasman Peninsula, Port Arthur part of the world, where they also have tussock, but at much smaller amounts, and they've been working very hard for a number of years with those landholders who have it to really try and keep it contained. This was actually a working bee here with the Tasman Land Care Group, which was a really great day. And it was really interesting actually using the dog in this landscape, because as you can see here, it's sort of like a, you know, typical East Coast Tasmania sheep resort with lots of beautiful vistas across waterways with islands and stuff. But this hillside, there's a whole group of us, and everyone had mattocks. So it was a bit of a competition here, who finds the tussock first, the humans or the dogs, because it was relatively easy to see. But as we walked further around this hillside, we started walking in amongst sags, sort of knee-high, tussock a hell of a lot harder to find. And it was just one of those really classic moments. So I was handling Fonz, and I was walking quite close to a couple of botanists who are well-known botanists in Tasmania who came along for the day. And humans being humans, we lose interest really quickly. We start talking about what we're doing on the weekend, and the botanists lost interest in the tussock and started botanising about other stuff. And but Fonzie never stopped looking for tussock in the whole time we were out there, and ended up finding a really quite substantial plant that our botanist friends just walked right past. Just interesting how that particularly, and it'd be really good to get the research that you're doing, Emma, because when does the dog also start getting tired and not probably paying so much attention? And certainly on this particular day, I learned a lesson because I worked him for too long. I should have called it quits probably a good 15 minutes earlier before I did. But anyway, we've got a project coming up. So this is actually our opportunity when we're actually going to get paid to use the dog and actually get, have additional work as for handlers. This is the application, Emma, that we were doing when you and I were cruising around. So we got it. Yay! So that's pretty exciting. So yeah, that's 65 grand, work with 13 different landholders. All of the landholders will have a different approach. They'll be putting 50-50 in and doing on-ground stuff in different ways. That's sort of a whole nother story. But we will be doing going to be working with our GIS person and actually using this as our opportunity to do our, I guess, our delimitation survey. And actually start looking in the areas in Glamorgan Spring Bay where very likely it will be. We've just never looked, and there's bound to be plenty of those places. And interestingly enough, actually, because of this project and because of this, the raising of the profile, I actually have now 2 landholders, which is a little bit unheard of. I'm a bit blown away by it. I'm actually really excited. One's some fairly sort of traditional, but quite progressive farmers who've been here on the East Coast forever. And their neighbour who has recently purchased a large farming property north of Tribunna, and they both actually want to pay to use Fonz to do survey work on their land, which is really like super exciting. So that people actually can see the value of that they'll put their hands in their own pocket is quite exciting. And certainly this project, we will use it as an opportunity to do a lot more media around Tussock and the issues and all the rest of it. Excitingly, well, good and bad. Bad, they found Serrated Tussock on Bruny Island, where they've just always been quite frightened it will be, because it's perfect. I don't know if anyone's been to Bruny, off the coast of down south of Hobart, but it's kind of across from other parts of southern Tasmania where there are where there is a lot of tussock. So I guess there's always been a bit of a fear for the weed people. That was probably that right, actually. the weird weed people. That it's got to be here somewhere. There's no way it can't be. So literally in the last couple of weeks, they found someone, Bruni, and that council's contacted us and actually want us to go. Got some budget to pay us to go over. And we're just going to this week hopefully do some media around that first, so we can actually get landholders to help us prioritise where we might search, so we can make the most of the opportunity, but also very limited budget, I guess, to start with, and do some strategic searching with the dog. And I guess to use it to raise the profile once again and get people themselves looking, because they need to be looking, basically. And yeah, it's been quite busy few months. There is an invasive species network that's facilitated by the state government, the biosecurity branch, which involves basically people from councils, biosecurity officers within the state government for the most part, and they get together a couple of times a year to talk about weeds and cats and rats and foxes. Occasionally they talk about foxes, or they don't talk about foxes, and just invasive species issues. And we did a demo with Fonzie, which went down really well, and I think that's, I guess, part of why Kingborough, they were at that presentation. So as soon as they found that tussock, they kind of got straight onto us about that. There's also a statewide conservation landholders network. So Tasmania, probably like other parts of the country, there's a lot of private conservation land. And that was a really excellent workshop, actually. There was a whole range of invasive species issues that were discussed at that, including cats. The president, we did a demo with Fonz out in the grounds there at Ross, and just had some really good conversations with some private land conservation people to get them thinking about how would you even know where to start for something like tussock on your property if you've got several hundred hectares of bush or mixed bush and pasture, to know whether you've got this plant there. And shortly it was cancelled because of the snow. Funnily enough, we will be doing a demo for the bush care team at Hobart, but that will be on Hawkweed. So yeah, onto Hawkweed. Fonzie's been working over the last month. Steve came down and did another week with myself and a couple of other handlers who will hopefully be able to help out with him, because myself and Amanda are not always going to be able to take him in other places, just 'cause we've got our other job to do. And I guess the key thing with that, of course, will be make sure everybody's 100% on the same page. And I'll be really interested to know what different people's thoughts are in terms of multiple handlers for dogs. If anyone does it, any thoughts on it, I'm most keen to hear about. And yeah, we've got Ryan and either Sally or Connor coming down in a couple of weeks. So we'll got a couple of spots being lined up for in the Central Highlands. So the places where Hawkweed is in Tassie is really quite different. So the two core infestations, one's at Ferntree. I don't know if people have been there, but up Mount Wellington. So on individual small landholders on, steep blocks of land that are on top of a mountain. And then the other infestations are in the Central Highlands, and I'm still getting a feel for it because it's not a weed I've personally ever dealt with, because that's the one weed we don't have on the East Coast because it's too dry. But it's just such a really different landscape. So we're absolutely learning a lot, and we're hoping, I guess, bringing Ryan and the mainland Hawkweed dogs over will help sort of accelerate our learning, and it'll be really interesting to see how the different dogs work as well. So in that project, all typical bureaucracy started way later than it should have, and it's been quite challenging because the Hawkweed disappears into the ground and becomes, goes into rhizome. So we're looking for really small plants, but luckily there's been enough around, and Fonz, he certainly gets it, but I think because as handlers it's really difficult for us to actually even identify Hawkweed at this stage. So we've still got a bit of a way to go, but we're getting there. It's going good, and that's it. Hawkweed, look out. So thank you. Any questions?
Awesome, thanks, Mel. And you'll get there on the Hawkweed ID. It's taken me a few summers, but I feel like I'm close.
Oh, it's a tricky bugger.
It is.
Oh God, yeah. I know. The first few days, I was like, I don't know.
Everything looks like Hawkweed, I think, for the first few days.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah. So I don't know. Any questions or any thoughts on the multiple handler thing? Does anybody?
Yeah, I've got one of my dogs, Rubble, is been handled by multiple handlers over the time. I've even had Nick try to handle Rubble at one stage. So yeah, if you want to have it is definitely something that's doable. There needs to be a bit of work put into it just to make sure that handlers are consistent across everything, and that Fonz will have respect, I suppose is one word for it, that they get along and there's a bond there between them, that he actually wants to work for that person, and each dog's sort of a little bit different as well. But yeah, it's definitely doable.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, I mean, I feel it's early days. I mean, not with Amanda. Amanda's worked with, basically trained Fonz alongside me, so he's really comfortable with her.
Yeah.
Possibly one of the things too, I guess, is also, he's a big dog. He's a big, strong dog, and when job's on, but he can, like any big dog, he can get excited and he can yank your arm off if he goes in the wrong direction. So I guess it's one of those things, getting really comfortable with working with the dog. Every dog has their challenges, of course, but
yeah.
And the dog being comfortable with you is something that's also really important, I think, too.
What was that, Nick?
The dog being comfortable with you as well. Mal, you were saying sort of both sides of the coin, like what Luke was saying. I think having the bond there is really good. And making sure that it goes both ways. You're comfortable with the dog, dog's comfortable with you. I think it's definitely possible.
Yeah.
It's
One
Lynn
thing
here, Lynn Baker. Can you hear me?
Hi, Lynn.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
I've joined Canines for Wildlife So I'm sort of here with Brad and Jack. But yeah, look, I've worked with dogs with multiple handlers on several occasions, and I agree it is doable. The critical things from my point of view, in addition, to the dog being comfortable with handlers being comfortable with dog, is the really strong consistency in cueing and behaviour of the handlers, so that everybody's exactly on the same page in terms of how they work with the dog and the commands and the responses on bridging and rewarding for odour.
Yeah, I mean, Steve obviously is fairly, experienced at training, I'm assuming, teams, and he had a lot of similar sorts of stuff around all of that, and that as a team we have to be, well, basically we have to have our policies and procedures and our clear commands, and everybody has to do it the same.
Yeah, and I think the main thing is that you train together. One of the issues that sort of creeps in if you've got people who live at distance from each other is there's really subtle little cues that develop in. And if you're not working together on a regular basis, you're not aware that they're creeping in. So that was the thing we found, was making sure we work together on a regular basis and get oversighted by someone who can pick up if anybody's developed a slight variant and make that, sort of fix that really quickly. Yeah.
No, that sounds, and that will be a challenge for us because we're all a bit spread out. But yeah, good points though. Thank you. So yeah, if there's kind of no questions.
Where does Hawkweed come from? Sorry, not Hawkweed. Serrated Tussock. Where does that come from originally?
South America. I think I should know the answer to that. Easy Google search. I'm pretty sure it's South America. Tussock, you're saying, not the Hawkweed?
Yeah, the Serrated Tussock, yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's South America, or maybe Spain. Oh gosh, that's terrible. Yeah, sorry, I don't definitively know the answer to that, but I better practice my background for Tussock.
Just curious.
Yeah, there's a couple of other Nacellas that are also, and potentially another, once Hawkweed nailed, we might be looking at doing Chilean needlegrass, which is actually worse than Serrated Tussock, because it's got all the same horrible ability, and it's in Tasmania, and the more they look, the more they find, the usual thing. It's also incredibly hard to identify, but what's even worse about it is it's got a, needlegrass, it's got like kind of a screw seed that really gets right into the flesh of creatures. So it can damage, any meat production, and obviously cause pain to creatures as well. So it's a really, really nasty one. So that might be our future weed. Well, I don't know if I'm that, so yeah, definitely won't be searching for it when it's in seed.
I can confirm you were right there, Mel. Serrated Tussock is from Chile and Argentina and Peru area.
Good, thank you.
Say it with confidence now.
yeah, that's good. I knew it was in there somewhere. I'm nervous.
Well, that was awesome. It's I think between the Hawkweed dogs and Fonz, we're getting a bit of a hit on the weeds. I think it's really exciting, and I think there's a lot more scope that could be used in plants in general. There's a few native plants overseas that they use dogs for, to find rare native plants. So there's potentially some good learning for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one thing I have learned from Sue, Sue and Mark as well. Basically, you certainly you can only do plants too, like with the dog, because if you ever try to put them onto cats or anything like that, they'll never look for tussock again, because won't be anywhere near as exciting.
That's just something I talk about in terms of complementary and uncomplimentary scents. when people ask me how many scents a dog could be trained on, and we've got some evidence to say that it's the number's somewhere 10 plus. But Missy, the first Hawkweed dog that you mentioned, her results actually weren't that crash hot as soon as you put her in the field. She was bang on the Hawkweed in a closed environment for sure. But once you put her outside, she'd previously been trained on rabbits. So there was something much more interesting out there for her to find when she was looking for the Hawkweed. So that's why 2 new dogs were then brought into the program.
Yeah. Well, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And I guess it does. There certainly would be some areas where Hawkweed and Tussock will overlap. There's no question about that. And it doesn't really matter. And at the moment, basically, we say when we're going for Hawkweed, we say to Fonz, find the Tussock.
Yeah.
It's kind of, there.
And I think that probably doesn't matter if he's got a strong indication and you can't see any evidence of something there. There's probably Hawkweed.
Well, goes back to our discussion around the stolen, which we're looking forward to. Yeah, we really kind of need to get to the bottom of that.
Maybe while we've got a collective brains trust with the dog people online here, Mel and I were having a conversation about Hawkweed the other day, because a lot of the plant is still there throughout the winter period, but it's under the ground in rhizomes. And there's been some work overseas around a dog, I think the Dyer's Woad, where they were digging up the soil when the dog was indicating and able to pull that apart and identify the rhizomes from the target plant within that soil. And we're interested in finding out about how we could sort of train and test. I guess it would be similar to truffle dogs, but even how good it could be used outside of the vegetative state of the plant to do. Has anyone got any thoughts around that? No? It's all silent.
Deafening silent.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
You need to probably have a look at the variations on the odour when it's in its rhizome state as opposed to when it's flowering or the other states. It may be an issue that there might be sufficient change to wrong foot the dog when it's making the identification. You need to probably have a look at that, and you can probably test that as well, just using a rack or similar when you're normally training your nose dogs. It certainly wouldn't be a simple process. It also depends on your substrate soils and anything else that might be in the soil at the time you're making that. Identifying the target species. So there's a fair bit to do there. You need to just make sure you're covering all your bases.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge because in each of the tests that I'm still doing, we are still getting a small percentage of false alerts.
That's what I was alluding to.
Yeah, and I think with my work watching handlers work at the moment, I think depending on how the handler's working that day could influence the number of false alerts that a dog is showing.
That also gives rise to using multiple handlers as well. You're opening up a lot of opportunities for stuff ups the more handlers you're using with the dog as well, I reckon.
Yeah, I think it'd be an odour that you'd be looking to, it'd just be an individual odour without any other odours on a dog to start with, just to make sure that that's the only thing that it alerts on, that's the only thing that it knows. And yeah, wouldn't be training any other odours on that particular dog until you knew you're confident that they were 100% right.
I agree with that. Spot on.
Sonia Needs might be an interesting person to talk to about generating what the odour is. She's doing some interesting studies at the moment about combining odours and then removing them all into individual components and back the other way. And I know she can potentially extract what the particular odour for each individual thing is as well. She's got some experience around that as well.
I was talking to someone today about myrrh, training dogs on myrrh, just an essential oil, and how she was getting interesting results where out of 6 or 8 essential oils, myrrh was the only one where the dogs were really falling down, a lot of errors and false alerts. And she was thinking it might be something to do with the way that the odour degrades over time. And so, again, what Luke was saying, talking to Sonia, she might have some other ideas around ways that perhaps you can measure that, and then perhaps the way the odour changes, like what Alex was saying, which could be a good brain to pick.
Yeah. Have you been working with her at all, Emma?
Yeah, we did a little mini masters project with the plants using dried and frozen samples of just a generic plant, and then testing the dogs to see if they could detect on fresh. I was really interested to see what substitute I could use for hawkweed, because we can't use fresh live hawkweed to test the dogs on because of the biosecurity risk. And I wanted to know whether using sort of chopped up mushy frozen samples or whether using dried samples would affect the way the dogs were detecting. And just a point of interest, the dogs, no matter what they were trained on, whether they were trained on dried or frozen or fresh, they were actually able to detect the frozen samples more readily, or first. When they were offered the choice between the samples, they would go to the frozen ones first. And there wasn't really much difference between the fresh and the dried, which is why I ended up using dried hawkweed samples as part of my trial, because it wasn't giving them an unfair advantage is what the frozen samples seem to do. So they were frozen and then defrosted, I guess, so they were wetter,
yeah,
to allow the scent to fuse more. But yeah, certainly I've been working with Sonia on a few things, so it might be interesting to talk to her about the rhizomes.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I have actually, I need to email her this week, because I was hoping that perhaps she said that she might have some honours, perhaps students that might be able to help us with this Tussock project, with the survey side of stuff.
Yeah.
I haven't really discussed exactly what, but might be an opportunity to get a bit of a rigor in the Tussock side. But I'm not sure who was it just said about making sure that the dog's locked on to the first odour. Is that what someone said before? That's critical, that you have to be pretty well 100% that they're locked onto that first odour before you.
Yeah, I was saying because it's something that you can't readily identify. You can't say, yep, that's it, and I can reward the dog. You'd want to be fairly I wouldn't be training any other odour on the dog. They'd be that odour and that odour only. So you're really 100% confident in what they're alerting on. That's the way I would be approaching it, and that you're really confident that that's the only thing that they alert on.
So, I mean, with the Tussock, we're pretty confident he's, locked onto the Tussock, but certainly not 100% confident yet with the hawkweed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For the rhizome stuff, I'd be doing a separate dog for that.
Oh, okay. And I'll just give you an example. So, like I say, because we've left this project, the Hawkweed project was started way too late. Like, there's one site where there's tiny little plants, like, sort of the size of your thumb, but there'll be a few of them, and most likely it's a cluster, and there is rhizomes underneath it. And Fonz will be fully indicating on it, but he won't kind of put his nose on those plants. He kind of scratches that whole area. And I guess we're wondering, is it because there's possibly more actual smell coming out from, I'm assuming that there's a whole heap of rhizomes that is probably that big or maybe even bigger, yet there's only a couple of little pinprick plants. So, I mean, I guess we don't know the answer to it. Like, what is he smelling?
And yeah. I think, Mel, this will depend whether you've done training using in situ live samples, so where you're taking him out to known spots and rewarding him on those, or whether you're doing it with just the plant biomass. Because certainly I'm assuming you don't have any training lit flowers or stolons within any take-home training samples. I'm assuming it's just leaf matter.
We did him with, we trained that first week we did with Steve. We had plants that had been dug up earlier, I suppose, and potted but there was no flowers. They were just,
So you did have the stolons as well. So he's trained on the plant and the stolon, which is the same as Connor and Sally.
Yeah. So he's got kind of a handful of the soil, some roots and dangly bits, and here and the leaf and the rosettes. So that's what we did in the first few days out at the South Hobart depot, which we had approval to do it, and then we've been in the field since then.
Yeah.
So we haven't. I think I did a couple of sessions at home, and they were just with dug up plants, obviously, and they were very unsuccessful because it was just way over the top with it. It was like, no, that's not a good idea. He needs to be back out in the field. So I haven't done anything with ex situ plants anymore. Yeah, but we won't be able to do that for much longer, basically, because the plants will be gone in the next few weeks. And
Does Tasmania have a stored stash of them? No.
As in what, dry?
As in a greenhouse somewhere? No.
They had a few, but yeah, they don't, not at the moment.
No.
So it'll be interesting. I guess he'll have to go back to Tussock until hawkweed season starts again.
Yeah, there is dried hawkweed that you can get, but I'm not sure how useful it is at this time. It might be better to wait.
Yeah, I mean, Steve certainly thinks that we should probably wait and not confuse stuff at the moment. But yeah, anyway, I don't know the answers to these questions really.
Well, we're getting close to 7 o'clock, so I don't know if anyone has anything more they want to discuss in relation to. Sorry?
I need to go, but
yeah.
I appreciate the opportunity to listen in. It's very good.
We still need to get a speaker for August. If anyone is interested in nominating on a project that they'd like to talk about. So we record them and they will go up online and shared with the network as well. So they do go to a fairly wide audience. Just going to stop the recording.